Hi there, this is Chris Green, and welcome to this training session on the secrets behind great public speaking. This session is going to last about 40 minutes, and at the end of it, hopefully, so grab some paper, grab some pen. Hopefully, you're going to get some tips about how you can become a better public speaker. And this is not theoretical. We're going to give you some tips that you can actually use, well, from the word go. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of what we're about. Today's session is going to cover three topics for you. Leadership and communication. Why is it important that as we climb the career ladder, communication and within that public speaking become more and more important? Secondly, we're going to look at the story we tell, because it's that story we tell that people remember and that gets us results. And the third thing is how we tell that story, because again, it's two sides of the same coin. It's the story we tell and how we tell it. It's the message and the messenger. Before I go on, let me tell you a quick bit about myself, Chris Green. I've been a public speaking coach and speechwriter for just over 10 years. I've published a book, Nail That Presentation, as you can see there. I've been training in the UK, in the Middle East, in the United States. Prior to helping other people by becoming a public speaking coach, I was a public speaker on behalf of a couple of FTSE 100 companies in the UK. So I was going out meeting investors, influencers, people, opinion formers, customers, stakeholders. Very often, sometimes in not just presentations to friendly audiences, but sometimes to some pretty skeptical and unfriendly audiences too. So I suppose I've been doing that for, well, I suppose speaking now for 20 odd years. I was in the Association of Speakers Clubs in the UK. And as I say, for the last 10 years, been helping other folks. So I suppose over that whole period of my life, I've probably given or helped other people give well over 1,000 presentations. And it's drawing on some of those experiences of both myself and clients that I'm going to share with you in the next 40 minutes or so. Now, starting off, do you remember back in the 1970s, this film, Jaws? Just the music itself, it's one of those pieces of music everybody can remember. And wow, I remember as a kid, I used to be scared. I used to be scared of going into a swimming pool in case somehow a great white shark had somehow managed to work its way through the sewage works and water pipes of England to get into the swimming pool. Jaws was the film that launched the career of Steven Spielberg, and at the time it was the biggest grossing box office success until the Star Wars films came along. So huge success. Even now, as I say, people hold it up as one of the great films to remember their childhoods, whatever. The music. Contrast it with this one. This is Jaws 4, also called Jaws the Revenge. It starred Michael Caine. So it actually had a better, I suppose, list of actors than the original Jaws film had. If you can't remember this one, in no great surprise, critics panned it. It was a complete flop at the cinema. And quite frankly, having sat through it, it really is one of the complete piles of crud that's out there as a film. Jaws, the original, won 3 Academy Awards. Jaws 4, The Revenge, was nominated for 7 Golden Raspberries. These are the awards that out there film critics give to the films that they think are the worst that particular year. Jaws 4 managed to be nominated for 7 of them. Why am I telling you this story? Well, if you remember, Jaws 4 had an actor like Michael Caine, highly experienced actor, as its lead role. And yet, because the script was so bad, it didn't really matter what Michael Caine did. The film was rubbish. And it was panned by critics, and it was a box office failure. And the message here is the same for public speaking and for communicating. That it doesn't matter how good you are as a communicator, if you haven't got a decent script, if you haven't got a narrative that really works and really engages with your audience, then the amount of tricks you've got left as a performer are very limited. So let's just move on and talk about leadership and communication. Leadership and communication, or people sometimes call leadership communication, is one of the key skills you need when you're trying to advance your career, when you're trying to take a business or an organization forward. I was doing some work with a guy called Lawrence Adele recently, and we were talking about, and we came up with this leadership triangle, that leadership really encompasses the following three areas: that you can lead the process or the processes, you lead the thinking, you're an opinion changer, and you lead the people. You take people on a journey that they never thought they would go on, sometimes one they never thought was possible. Now, leaders can work in all three of those areas. Some people purely lead thinking, some people lead people, some people lead processes. But leadership overall definitely involves leading that thinking and leading those people. And you need to communicate to be able to do that, whether you're communicating one-on-one or one-to-many. So communication is an essential part of leadership. And it doesn't matter how many ways you try and twist and turn out of it, how many times you try and delegate it to other people, eventually the music is going to stop and you are going to have to communicate. And one of the most critical ways, one of the most influential ways of communicating is to influence en masse. There are people out there who are brilliant at building one-on-one relationships, building that rapport. And there's definitely a place for that in leadership, where people can go and they can walk the shop floor, they can work with people, they can actually talk to clients and customers, find out what's going on, a bit like the undercover boss. But eventually, when you want to influence en masse, you're going to have to speak in public, because quite frankly, going for coffees with each and every member of your staff, each and every member of your clients and customers just is not going to be practical. So how do you influence en masse? And that does come down to public speaking. And who are you going to be influencing en masse? Well, you could certainly be trying to influence customers. Sales pitch from a simple pitch. Maybe it's not a sales pitch. Maybe this is actually positioning your brand, vision that you have as a business, your credibility to people who maybe one day will become your clients and customers. You might be trying to influence en masse your colleagues, people who sit alongside you, people who work for you. Stakeholders, and they come in all shapes and sizes. You might be wanting to talk to suppliers. And suppliers can be anything from people who supply raw materials through to you, to people who supply services, people who provide transportation, third parties. But stakeholders is wider than that. Stakeholders can be your local community, the community in which you operate. Stakeholders could be local politicians, national politicians. Stakeholders, I suppose you could also put them alongside colleagues, but could be in trade organizations. Another group of people that you might be wanting to influence are opinion formers. And very often those will be journalists. They could be journalists from national TV or national radio, national newspapers, could be trade journalists as well, who again can create an opinion, they can create a story to tell about your business. And it could be good, it could be bad. That story could be about you personally as well, and your and how you're seen amongst your peers influence are investors. And again, that could be one-off pitches to existing investors or to potential investors, or it could be to a wider group. Now we're moving into things like business funding, crowdfunding, that sort of thing. Actually, you might be wanting to pitch to a wider group of people than before. So when you are speaking en masse, when you're trying to influence en masse, what is your message? And time again, I work with people, as I say, I'm a public speaking coach, and I tend to work with people who come to me and say, "Look, Chris, I've got a big presentation coming up, and can you just just iron out some of the rough wrinkles in my presentation, knock off some of the jagged edges." And when we actually start to listen to them, when we're working together, it becomes very apparent that they are not sure what their real message is about. And if you think about it logically, if they're not sure what their message is about, how on earth can your audience understand what your message is about? So what's your message is actually, it sounds like a very easy question. It's actually sometimes a little bit harder to answer. Because the question behind it, therefore, is what is your purpose? Why are you speaking? What do you want to happen at the end of it all? And people, again, will say to me things like, "Oh, well, I want people to buy from me." I hear this when people go to maybe a Chamber of Commerce meeting, and they're going to get up, they're going to do a 2-minute, 5-minute spiel about their business. And they'll say, "Yeah, well, what I want is I want people to buy from me." If you think about that in the cold light of day, how on earth are you going to convince people in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, to move from never even knowing who on earth you are, let alone what you do, to wanting to give you business? Sometimes it can work. You might just have the thing that answers all their problems that they've got right now. Well, you've landed on your feet. But the reality is most of the time we don't do that. You're a charity, you're standing up at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, and you're expecting all the businesses in that room to suddenly choose your charity to support today. Is that really going to happen? So what is your purpose today? That could be the ultimate purpose, but what do you want this speech today to do? Let's keep with that charity. Maybe you want some of the people in the room to give you their business card, because then you can start a dialogue. Because I know people, I've worked with quite a few charities, reeling a company in to be a corporate sponsor to support you as one of their chosen charities this year, that takes time. It isn't some sort of conversion on the road to Damascus. And normally they've got some charities already that they're working with, so you're going to have to supplant those charities. That's going to take some negotiation. You've got to build a relationship. And there's that old adage, isn't there, that people do business with each other, not organizations. So you're going to have to form some sort of relationship. And the start of that relationship is for people to want to give you their business card. And the reason they want to give you their business card is because they actually like what you're saying, they like what you're about, and actually they like you. So your purpose is to get them to give you that business card so you can start that relationship. Okay. So that's all well and good. So how do you actually construct a story? What is the story you're going to tell now that you know what you want them to do at the end of it? Winston Churchill came out with a great maxim, tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what they've just heard. And that's a little bit like this diagram I've got here in front of you. Your introduction, your main body of your speech, your conclusion. And if you think that your introduction and your conclusion probably each take about 10%, or should take about 10% of your presentation time, the main body, the evidence, how you're really going to convince people to come on board or whatever it might be, is in the main body of your argument. And that's going to take about 80% of your presentation. So the best place to start is actually in that main body, because how on earth can you draw a conclusion until you have a main body of evidence or an argument? And actually your intro Your intro should tell them what they're going to hear. And until you've actually worked out what's going on in that main body, you don't know what you're going to introduce. So the main body is where you're going to, as I say, is going to be where you're going to present your evidence, your story. That's your narrative. And remember here that actually most people, we don't need to cover that many points in that main body. Sometimes we try and over-egg it by, if I'm going to tell you about my company or my charity or whatever it might be, I'm going to tell you 16 different things that, are important. Well, actually, they're not all that important. There's 3, 4, 5 things that are crucially important. All those other things are supporting evidence. So let's really focus on those crucial ones, that 3, 4, 5 things that are really, really important. Having got your main body together, then look at your conclusion. Because of what I've told you, what do I want you, or what should you believe? And remember, that conclusion should be taking them to the purpose of your talk. So if we went back to that charity, if I was going to give you if I want you all to give me your business card, then what I want is to tell you that after listening to all this stuff, now you know why my charity is really important, why I believe what I do, and what I want from you. But what I really want you to do at the end of this session now is I would like you to give me your business cards. Okay. Leaves people in no doubt as to what you want them to do. And so many times you watch presentations, sales presentations, business presentations, speeches, where actually you're not really sure what you should be doing at the end of it. And if you leave people with any sense of doubt and confusion, then they're bound to go off in the wrong direction, and they won't give you what you wanted from the presentation. Finally, in a bizarre twist, your introduction is the last bit you do of your speech. This is the bit that tells them what to expect. It's like the headlines in the when you watch the news or listen to the news on the radio. Okay, that the introduction, you tell people what to expect, and this is what you're going to do in your within the introduction of your speech. The other thing that sometimes happens, if you think about films and television programs, they create a sense of suspense. And they draw you in. That's a different style of introduction. But either way, what you're doing is making people interested in what you're going to talk about. And you're going to show them, take them on a journey. So you've got an introduction, the main body, and finally a conclusion. And it flows effortlessly. You don't start an introduction that has no relevance to the main points. The main points lead to your conclusion. You don't introduce anything new. It's a straight line. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about getting your message across. And as I said to you earlier, when clients come to me, this is often the bit that they're really concerned about. How do I get my message across? The crucial bit was actually you need to get the message right in the first place, which is what we've just been talking about. And people worry. People worry about how they're going to look. Are they going to look stupid? Are they going to bore everybody? And I suppose people are very concerned about how the speech is going to reflect on them. And one of the bizarre things is, as you climb a career ladder, public speaking becomes more and more important, because when you're a 20-year-old and you do a presentation in-house, if it goes wrong, it could be highly embarrassing. And I've been there in my career, but actually it's not a career stopper. When you're the chief executive of a business, maybe you've built a business yourself and your name's above the door. Actually, when it goes wrong, there's a lot more at stake. There's a lot more at stake for your company, losing a massive order, getting a poor press. There's actually a lot more at stake for your personal credibility as well. And that makes people even more worried, because suddenly the stakes they're speaking for, are so much higher than they were when they were earlier on in their career. And an added thing goes with that people say to me, because I am now a leader, people expect me to be somehow a brilliant speaker. And remembering back to that triangle, you can understand why, the leadership triangle. People expect leaders to be able to lead the people, to lead the thinking, and sort of de facto, you need to be a good speaker, you need to be a good communicator, and people expect you to be that. And if there's a worry some people have is, heck, what if people come away thinking he's a rubbish communicator, and therefore, why the hell's he a leader? In fact, actually, that sort of makes questions your leadership abilities. Well, the first thing to say is that, well, the big thing to say is, it's not about you. This is not the Chris Green show when you're up there on a platform or in front of an audience. You know, let's twist it around. It's all about your audience. What you want to do is either educate or persuade your audience to do something. You want them to be wiser. You want to impart something. You want to take them on a journey. And when you think about it from an audience perspective, they're giving up their time to listen to you. So what are you going to offer them? One of the main reasons we speaking en masse, is to persuade people. And the thing that we've got to remember is that our audience are made up of loads of different people with different motivators, different ways of learning, different ways of making decisions, and they're not all the same. And what we tend to do is we tend to take our preferred style, our preferred way of persuading people, and we use that. This is a model that comes from Aristotle, from ancient Greece, Aristotle's model of persuasion. And Aristotle said, really, people are persuaded by three things: ethos, logos, and pathos. Some people are persuaded by ethos. It's personal credibility of the speaker. That can be whether your reputation, which could be like you are a professor, you are the managing director of a company, chief exec of a charity, head teacher of a school, that actually carries some weight to certain members of the audience. There's something about your own trustworthiness. You know, some people say, about politicians, don't they? Well, he or she might say that, but actually, I wouldn't believe them because they're a politician. And certain politicians are seen to be more trustworthy than other politicians. So there's that whole bit about personal integrity, trustworthiness that is in there. And the final bit within ethos, credibility, is how you come across, that tone and style. Actually, do you look like you are highly confident, looking like you're really enjoying it up there? Or are you looking like you're running for cover, hating every minute of it, sweating profusely, shaking? And that in itself will give, for some people will say, I didn't like her because she looked ill at ease. Did you see him? He was really sweating. And they draw their own conclusions from that, and right or wrong, but that is how they will perceive you. So ethos is one way of persuading people, but only one. The second area of persuasion, and again, there'll be a group of people in your audience who will be persuaded by this. This will be their number one area. Logos, logic. This is all about facts and figures. Reasoning, rational argument. Show me the famous thing, show me the money, show me the figures, and you can convince me. And what's interesting is a lot of business leaders who are concerned and have some anxiety about communicating and speaking in public, they run to this logic area, this logos area. That's their area of cover. And it's almost like, if I can show you that I know my brief really well, if I can show you through quoting facts and figures and quotes of famous people, etc., then actually, by default, you know that I have a command of my brief. And there's an extra bit that goes in there, probably not sort of in the back of their mind, not front of mind at all, which is, and therefore, don't attack me, don't question me, because I can show you that I am clever. Okay. And there are people in the audience who want to see that logic. Someone recently, I saw someone, a member of the Conservative Party, who said the problem they had with David Cameron, the Conservative Party leader in England, is that and Britain, sorry, is that he talks a lot of good stories, but I never get any real hard facts and figures from him. That's because that particular person was really into logos. They are convinced by the logic. They don't give two hoots about whether you're a professor or, that ethos stuff up there. They don't give two hoots about whether you're sweating profusely. They want to hear the numbers. They want to see the facts. The final group of people, and the final way of persuading people, is with pathos, emotion. This is where people tell stories. This is where they share their personal journey, their personal vision. I was working with a client once from Rochdale, just north of Manchester, and we were talking about his business. It happened to be an engineering business, and he was going to give a presentation about it. And we were talking, and he was talking about, the number of people they employ, the turnover, the number of things they made, the different markets they serve. And it's a bit like the company report, but being verbalized. Anyway, we got chatting, and we were talking about why the business was founded. It was founded by his grandfather in the 1920s, 1930s, during the Depression. And his grandfather had fought in the First World War and was really frustrated by the amount of World War I veterans who'd basically been thrown on the scrap heap because of the Great Depression, and felt he needed to do something about it. And that's why he set up his business. He set it up almost, he's a capitalist guy, but he set it up almost with a social mission as well. And so we started to incorporate that into this guy's presentation. And he actually spoke for most of the presentation about this business, why it was set up, and why it continues to foster those links, and how it is still true to his roots. The amount of people at the end of that presentation who came up to talk to him and were moved by pathos. He didn't talk about turnover and how many things they made and how quickly they could fulfill orders for you. People bought the man and his family and the family business. Isn't it interesting? Not everyone will, but like that guy I was talking about David Cameron, he didn't buy all the David Cameron story stuff over here. But there are a group of, that large part of your audience, and let's just break it into thirds. A third will be influenced by ethos, a third logos, a third pathos. Actually, researchers suggested it's a lot more than a third for pathos. Pathos is the big thing that motivates people. How are you incorporating this into your speeches and presentations? The second thing that you can look at is keeping it simple. Keep it simple, stupid. KISS. If you want to, I'm a historian by background, and one of the things that fascinates me is during the Second World War, the great convoys of ships that used to come across the North Atlantic from Canada and the United States over to Britain. And the power of the convoy was they all kept together to keep the German submarines away from them. And immediately the convoy got split up, the German submarines could pick off individual ships, normally the ones at the back, the old slow ones that couldn't outrun a submarine, that weren't armed. I mean, not many submarines wanted to take on a battleship or something. So they'd always find the old freight steamer at the back who was chugging along really slowly. So the convoy system recognized that. And the convoy system tried to, unfortunately for some, but they went or attempted to go at the speed of their slowest ship, so that the convoy never got strung out, and they corralled the ships together and became very effective. Actually helped a part of how they defeated the German U-boat campaign in the Second World War. Avoiding jargon and keeping things simple is rather like that as well. The problem with using jargon works really well. It works fantastic well. If you're a scientist and you're talking to a whole lot of fellow scientists, you can talk jargon and people understand you. The problem is, if you're not talking to fellow scientists and you use that jargon, slowly you start to break up your convoy, that the slowest ships start to not understand what you're talking about. And remember, you as a speaker, what you're trying to do is influence people to take some sort of action. If they don't understand what you're talking about, can they take that action? They don't actually know which action to take, and they're not convinced that it's the right action. So it's crucial that you avoid jargon wherever possible. Allied to that is avoid showing off. There are folk out there that like to prove how clever they are by using very large words, talking about ancient Greek history and mythology, which is great and some great stories there. But the problem is, if people don't understand big long words, if people don't understand Greek mythology, unless you're going to tell the whole story, they will actually lose the message. So by quoting a hero from the Trojan Wars and saying it's just like so-and-so, most folk in the audience will think, who the hell is he talking about? And you're diluting your message. Similarly, long words sound impressive, but there's actually a very small part of your audience who will understand them. Again, if you're speaking to a whole lot of university English lecturers, professors, they probably will have a very good grasp of the English language and very wide vocabulary. But for a lot of folk, that's not the case. So they'll come away thinking, he or she's very clever, they use some very big words, and they were talking about characters from history I'd never heard of. But that's not the point of your presentation or your speech. Your speech is to influence people to take a course of action. Influencing. And all you'll actually they'll come away thinking is, he or she's very clever, but I haven't got a clue what they were talking about. Don't believe me? Go to some church sermons, especially Church of England, Anglican ones, where you have a very theological guy who quotes all different bits out of the Bible, but you haven't got a clue what he's talking about. And the final thing about keeping it simple, stupid, if you want to keep drumming your message home to people, repeat it. And there's two ways you can repeat it. One is to keep coming back to the same message throughout your presentation. So if you want to talk about the fact that we are a business that's always, for the last 100 years, looked after its customers, then every point you make in that main body of your speech, earlier we were saying maybe you make 3, 4, 5 main points in that body of your speech. Each one of those, refer it back to, this is another example of how we have been looking after customers for 100 years. It's another example of how we look after customers for 100 years. It hasn't changed in 100 years. We still look after customers. It becomes a repetitive message throughout your speech. The other way of repeating things is to repeat them straight away. Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister during the 1990s, talked about education, education, education. Martin Luther King had a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream. He mentioned I have a dream 7 times. The I have a dream speech, which is ranked as one of the most famous, most inspirational speeches by most people, actually lasted nearly 15 minutes. I have a dream 7 times in that whole 15 minutes. But it's known as the I have a dream speech. It's the only bit most people can quote from that speech. Had disproportionate power. It's the power of repetition. One of my political heroes, Winston Churchill, from the Second World War, made a speech as Britain faced Nazi Germany by themselves, had been defeated on the continent of Europe. And he talked about how Britain was going to fight on. And his speech was, we will fight them on the beaches. In that speech, he mentions the phrase, we will fight 7 times. We will fight them on the beaches. We'll fight them on the landing fields. We'll fight them in the towns. We'll fight them in the countryside. We'll fight them in the mountains. And so it went on 7 times. The message that he was getting across to the British people, but also quite importantly to the American people who he wanted support from, was, we're going to keep fighting. It wasn't a throwaway. And now, even now, when people say, you know, give me a Winston Churchill quote, most people do their Winston Churchill voice, and they will do you the "We will fight them on the beaches" speech. But the only bit they can tell you is "We will fight them on the beaches." That's it. That's the power of repetition. People remember the message, the overall nuance of the message. They won't remember all the words. I was saying in the Aristotle principle model of persuasion that people are all different in your audience, and they're persuaded differently. People also learn differently. And I want to introduce you to a thing called VAC, Visual Audio Kinesthetic. It's a model that was designed by a guy from New Zealand, Neil Fleming. And he was again saying there's no rights or wrongs, but people will have a preference, rather like they had a preference between pathos, ethos, and logos. They have a preference as to whether they are visual people. They learn by seeing things, hearing things, or doing things. So visual people like to see. So they like to see you. They like to see your performance. They like to see you walking around the stage. They like to see how you look. They like to see visuals, so flip charts, yes, the famous PowerPoint presentations. It doesn't have to be PowerPoint bullet points. It can be, well, a slide, but like I've got here with just an image on it. Okay, but they're actually very visual. Handouts, yeah, the handouts will work for these people. At the extreme level, they will be reading most of the handout as you're speaking. Okay, that can be quite disconcerting when you're trying to do a speech as well, but that's about visual. They will also be influenced and learn by the words you use if they are visual words. So for instance, if you say, I want you, in your mind's eye, just picture this scene. Visual people will like that. They will actually picture what you're trying to talk about. Just think back and picture your best holiday ever. Visual people go there, they start to picture it. And if you use, I suppose, trigger words like see, look, and you'll hear that. Just listen in now to certain politicians who are very visual. They will say to you very often, look, look here. The word look, very powerful. And for those people, it is. For your other two groups, well, it's neither here nor there. So let me introduce you to the other two groups. The second group are auditory. They like to hear you, which is interesting because we're talking about public speaking. You would think that most people want to be auditory. Fleming's work with the Vark model actually suggests that the minority of people are auditory. It is something like 15–20% of people tend to have this as their preference. They actually listen to you. And they might do two things. They could specifically be listening to the words you use. And it was Rudyard Kipling who said words are the most powerful drug known to man. But they will listen to the words, very specifically to the message. And they will also listen to the way it's delivered. There's a guy called Morabian. He did some work on how do people remember messages when they're given to them. And the bulk of people remember it by the vocal, or large group of people remember far more by the tone of voice, the way it was delivered, than actual words, specific words that were used. So auditory people like to hear. They're not really worried whether they can see you at the front or not. They like to hear. And again, trigger words in your presentation, such as, listen to this. Can you hear what customers are saying? Auditory people will actually buy into that. And the final group of people are the kinesthetic people, feeling it. You know, they are people who actually they like to learn by doing, as a general rule. So if you've got props that you can hand out to people in your presentation, they will enjoy that. These people will learn from that. But more importantly, again, trigger words like, can you feel? Can you feel the energy in the room? If you talk about things like comfort, if you talk about this is going to feel really uncomfortable to a lot of the people in this room, kinesthetic people, that's a trigger word, kinesthetic people engage with you. So we're rolling towards the end, and really introduce you to a few different things. First off, that communication is a key leadership skill. And it doesn't matter how you try and wiggle your way out of it, eventually you're probably going to have to do some public speaking as a leader. It's expected of you, it's demanded of you, and it's the only way that you can influence many people en masse, whether they're investors, opinion formers, colleagues, customers, you name it. And you need to plan a structured, flowing message that's got a purpose. If you're going to influence people, you've got to take them on a journey. And that means actually spending some time thinking through why you are speaking and what you want out of it. And then constructing your message to take them to that goal and to produce that result. And then finally, you need to think of how you're going to plan to get that message across to people. So not everybody thinks like you. And actually in that audience, they're all very different. So when we're thinking of persuading people, let's think about how do we influence the people who are persuaded by ethos and the people who need logic. And finally, the people who are persuaded by pathos, emotions and stories and showing you and the authentic leadership. When we talk about authentic leadership, it's very much moving into the pathos area. If you want to get that message across, keep it simple. Avoid jargon, avoid showing off and being intellectually clever, and repeat your message time and time again. It doesn't matter how many times you repeat it. And then finally, remember that people will learn and take in your message based on whether they're visual, whether they're auditory, or whether they're kinesthetic. And that will be both in the tools you use to deliver your message, things like flip charts, props, etc., but also in the words you use. And finally, just one last thing. Hopefully you've got this key bit from this presentation, which is it's not about you, it's about your audience. You have a message to give. You either want to educate, or you want to entertain, or you want to influence. And most of us want to influence. That's what most of us are speaking for. The whole job is about your audience and how you get that message across to them, rather than how you look in some beauty contest. It's about what value you've added to your audience and how you've engaged them so that ultimately they come on that journey with you. I hope that's been of use, guys. It goes into a little bit more maybe than some bog standard presentation skills courses cover, where they tell you you've got to stand and speak and be heard at the back of the room and give a bit of eye contact, and that's all in there. You can tell that's in there in the way you deliver. But actually, there's a fair bit of psychology in there, and when we stand back, it makes a lot of sense. So hopefully you've taken a few things away from this. It's been of use, and I look forward to working with you again very, very soon. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.